Hello, everybody. This is Kelly Kleiman, dealershipnews.com. This is our podcast where we spotlight the who's happening in the automotive industry. It's foot soldiers, visionaries, salesmen, GMs, owners, service managers, and industry vendors alike. We have two of those today. Our guests are none other than the founder of Drivably, Mr. Tyler Hall, and co-founder and chief rev officer, Andrew Sweet. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Kelly, thanks for having us, man. We're happy to be here.
A pleasure to have you. I like asking our guests the same question on each podcast because sometimes they come up with some pretty unique answers. And the first question is, how did you get into the automotive industry? It's an accident for some people. Some people were born into it. It was manifest destiny. Tyler, you've got the floor.
Yeah, I would say mine falls into the accident category. When I was a 20-year-old kid in college, I was working full-time, I was going to school full-time, and I was broke as a joke. And I finally saved up enough money to buy my first car. And after I did that, I realized that the car I had purchased was worth quite a bit more money than I paid for it. And so like any smart or dumb young college kid, I turned around and I sold it. And I made a couple $1,000. And I didn't think a whole lot of it at the time, Kelly, but I went ahead and I bought another car because I needed a mode of transportation. And the same cycle repeated itself. And so over the next 90 days or so, I bought and sold about 20 cars. And one day I'm at the DMV and I'm going to title one of these cars that I was flipping. And the nice old lady in there said, Tyler, I see you in here quite a bit now. What, are you a dealer by chance? And I said, no. She said, are you a wholesaler? I said, no. Are you a broker? No. She said, do you have any license of any kind? And I told her, no, I didn't. And she said, I said, why do you ask? She said, well, you know that what you're doing is very illegal.
Exactly.
And that was a rude awakening for me. And so, I started trembling. I got scared. I asked her, am I going to go to jail? And she said, no, you just need to be careful. And if you want to keep doing this, you have to get a dealer license. And so I wasn't going to become a dealer at that time. I didn't really have the motivation or the passion to want to do that as a full-time student. Mm-hmm. And so I went and started knocking on dealerships' doors, and I got one guy to commit to letting me use his license. And so I got even smarter. I was somewhat technical in nature growing up. I developed an application that helped me source private consumers' inventories better. So essentially I had automated that process for me, and I had no plans of licensing this technology to dealers. But one day I was in the dealership of the dealer whose license I was using. And at this point I had bought and sold about 100 cars. And he said, Tyler, you're actually outpacing me this month. You're buying and selling more cars than even I do as a licensed dealer. Wow. And he said, what are you doing? And I showed him the program. And he said, why don't we trade? I'd love to use your tech in exchange for my license. And next thing you know, over the next 30 days or so, I licensed that software to a number of dealerships in Utah. And the one thing that I learned to be true across the board was that for these guys to acquire the right used car inventory to sell quickly and be profitable was getting harder and harder. And this was about 8 or 9 years ago. And so now you fast forward to today, and we formed Drivably at the beginning of this year to solve precisely that problem, help dealerships make better decisions on the inventory that they buy. So that's my story.
And we're going to get more into your story as it is currently here in a moment or two after we find out what got Andrew Sweet into the business.
Outside of stealing cars, no, for real though. Never stolen any cars. Complete accident. My brother's in the car business, but more on the service and bodywork side. So outside of that and meeting Tyler about 3.5 years ago, it's complete accident. But it's been an amazing journey over the last few years, learning the business, learning all the players and all the opportunities that Drivably can help.
Let's get into an elevator pitch. I'm not sure. I think we ought to give it to the sales guy, and that would be Andrew. Let's hear your 30-second elevator pitch. You're trapped on the 20th floor of Dealership News in beautiful Miami, Florida, and you're with the owner of a large dealership group, and like I said, you've got 30 seconds to blow my mind.
Yeah, so assuming this gentleman inquires and asks what I do, I would tell him that I work for a company called Drivably, and we help dealerships acquire inventory. We get inventory, and when we say get inventory, we mean We help dealers acquire it. We help them understand it. Our customers have come to us and they tell us that at any given time they owe 25 to 30% of their inventory is not being positioned to sell correctly, especially if they have multiple locations. It's not because they're not trying to deploy that inventory correctly. It has to do with that inventory isn't being looked at or evaluated day to day, and that problem manifests itself on the buying side. Human beings don't have enough time to go through all the information, and buyers traditionally, from our observations, maybe look at anywhere from 1 to 500 cars a day at max. We look at all the cars every day, all the time, and recommend the right piece of inventory for their particular business. So buyers can spend more time making decisions versus acquiring and finding data to make those decisions.
That was about a minute and 20 seconds.
Fail.
But you sold me.
Kelly, what do you say?
Yeah, if you let me talk, I'm going to talk. Okay, I can keep going.
I do, actually.
We had a couple stops on the way down.
Well, look, I mean, I think that might have gotten into a little bit of our next question, and I like to frame it with this. If you could share with us some of the issues that are inherent with inaccurate pricing information, and you sort of touched on it, you already are framing the question with the answer. So again, if you could share with us some of the issues that are inherent with inaccurate pricing information, I know it's a big problem, and how it not only paints the industry in a bad light, but has a snowball effect on the process of moving inventory, on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I'll start the answer to that question on what I think the supply side of the answer is, and then I'll let Tyler talk about perhaps how that problem pertains in other areas of the business. Naturally, we think dealerships should be competitive in their pricing strategies. We're more focused on understanding what's available on the supply side and how that compares to our clients' customer segments and their business models. Mm-hmm. And when we understand those things, we can expose them to the best opportunities that fits all three areas: the supply side, the customer side, and their business model. And sometimes what a client is trying to do from a retailing strategy isn't always in alignment with those two things, which is why we're so passionate about understanding what the wholesale market can provide.
Next batter.
Yeah, so I think Ezra's right. We don't spend a whole lot of time focusing on inaccurate pricing when it comes to pricing your inventory as a dealership or as a retailer, as much as we do helping you have access to the right information to make the right decisions on how to stock your lot or optimize your lot, is the way that we would call that.
Understood.
And so for me, I think a lot of the inaccurate pricing comes from, I think there's a number of reasons, but namely the fact that dealerships use tools today that help them understand specifically what's available in and around their market. And it's quickly pigeonholed dealers into undercutting their prices, and it's become a race to the bottom in order to be competitive within your market. And so a lot of that has to do with the fact that we believe each unique dealership is precisely that. They're unique. And the way that we recommend inventory is not solely based on a market or what's happening within that market, but it's more so based on your store's historical sales and the history of the type of consumer or the demographic of consumer that's going to walk into your store. And so inherently, we believe a lot of the issues around retail pricing have to do with the fact that people are being misguided with information that's forcing them to sell the cars cheaper than they need to.
You have an ability to match inventory with your dealership partners, correct? And
correct.
So the question is, how does that take place? What's the criteria behind the matching of inventory with any specific dealer other than historically? Because new models come out, demographics change from PMA to PMA over the years. How does the criteria evolve over time?
It's good. It's a good question. I'll give you the summarized version of that. We don't necessarily really think about it in terms of criteria per se. We think about more of how do we weight an algorithm to quickly process information similar to how a human buyer would do it. Mm-hmm. So you can call that a directional recommendation. So it's really more about speed than being perfect. Mm-hmm. at least in our case and right now. So let me give you a quick example of how we do that. So we ingest all of the wholesale data we can get our hands on, and on most days that's anywhere from 90 to 95% of the wholesale market. We clean that data, we normalize that data, and then we process it. And when I say process, I mean that we essentially rank all of those cars from top to bottom, weighting the same 5 to 8 metrics that a human would do. So you could call it price, MMR, market day supply, wholesale retail listing data, et cetera. And the main difference being that a human could do this a few hundred times a day. We can do it a million times a day, every day. Mm-hmm. That first preliminary ranking is what we call our Drivably score. Mm-hmm. And that score directly correlates with how we think that car would perform within the business that the dealer is operating under. So if they're trying to achieve a higher profit versus a quicker turn time, and all the variations in between. And that's really our core recommendation. Mm-hmm. After that, some of the things Tyler's mentioning, when we get access to historical data from our partners in the forms of sales data, customer data, et cetera, we then start building what's called a custom recommendation engine for each individual client. So really, at the end of the day, we're building models that recommend specific inventory for each client we have. So an example of that could be you could have two customers, we could have two clients on the opposite side of the street from one another who maybe on the surface look like their businesses are the same. Mm-hmm. But once we dig into the numbers, the way that our system would be generating recommendations for their businesses would be completely different due to the intricacy of how the business performs, how their customers look and feel, and historically what makes the models have worked for them.
So the metrics are the criteria, basically, more than anything. And then the historical. Okay, I get it. I think that's fantastic. I'd like to see a demo at some point on how this all works, if you guys are up for it sometime next week, maybe, because it's interesting. Now, you just partnered with Black Book. I know them very well. How do you leverage Black Book's data to bring a better, more accurate product to the dealer?
Yeah, great question. We really like those guys, by the way. Shout out to Black Book, Jared and Anil specifically. They've been really helpful over the last 4 or 5 months as we've started to engage with them. And so, as you talk a little bit more about the criteria that feeds the recommendation engines that we build for our customers, really it's a couple of key data sets that, when married together, provide the precise ability to recommend the right inventory. And those data sets are a few things: book valuations, and as you know, those book valuations are, a few of them are being generated through Black Book's data. You can probably think of the other books that any given dealership would care about in the U.S., and those are the same valuation data that we bring into the platform. Mm-hmm. The second thing is understanding intimately any given regional market. So we want to know what's happening from a retail and a wholesale standpoint, not only what's listed on the retail market and at what prices, but also what's transacted on in any given retail market and any given wholesale market. The next layer of data that's critically important is what we call demand sensing. And demand sensing is, us partnering with the largest search engine companies in the world, like Google, to really understand what consumers are looking for within any given market. And so if there's a high demand for a certain type of vehicle, but the supply within any given market is low, it's obvious that there needs to be more of those readily available to consumers. And then the last thing, and the most critical element of us providing a recommendation back to a customer, is historically understanding precisely what they bought, where they bought it from, for how much, when they sold it, how much they spent on reconditioning that car, who they sold it to, and for how much. And by measuring that in a real-time manner from 12 months previous leading up to the present day, and marrying that with the other core data sets, including Black Book, it really helps us provide the right recommendations that ultimately lead to more profitability and faster turn. So,
what it brings to mind is the idea that a convertible Jetta in Minnesota probably isn't going to be worth as much as a convertible Jetta in Los Angeles, California. You just can't use the convertible very out, right?
Yeah, and I love your call out on that, Kelly, because so many of these things are so obvious, right, to many people. And so many of, what we would call like arbitrage opportunities are also obvious. And I'll give you one example. Mm-hmm. Most dealers in Arizona know that if they buy two-wheel drive trucks in a snowy climate in Utah in January, and they put them on a truck for $300 and they send them to Arizona, by the time they arrive at their door, they're going to buy that car roughly 10% cheaper than they could acquire that car in their own backyard. That's an obvious arbitrage scenario, but there's hundreds of thousands of other opportunities that exist in being able to identify cars in markets that have a low demand for that car, and then parallel markets that have a high demand for that same car. And that opportunity precisely provides opportunity and potentially more profitability for the acquiring dealer. And so nobody today understands why 2012 Ford Focuses in Des Moines, Iowa are worth 10% more than 2012 Ford Focuses in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Yeah. But they are, and we only know that because that's what the data tells us. And so, we're uncovering opportunities for dealerships to acquire inventory outside of their own markets that they wouldn't have ever been able to see without having access to the level of data that we have.
How does this data-driven technology help improve a dealer's bottom line? I mean, you've touched on it. It's probably the obvious question, but just fire away.
That's good. That's a good question. I mean, depending on each dealer's specific scenario, it obviously is different across the board, but really the right inventory on the front end translates to efficiency and other operational advantages throughout the business, which I'm sure is no piece of new information to you. Historically, the clients that we've worked with over the past 6 months, they're going to generally see an increase in front end gross profit of anywhere from $500 to $1,200 per unit. They're going to see a reduction in time spent sourcing and buying anywhere from 70 to 95%. And time spent at physical and online auctions nearly eliminates itself completely. By having all the information at your disposal, you don't need to spend time watching what runs through the lanes. And better yet, probably I'd say what a theme that we didn't expect to hear from our clients was no more stocking surprises, meaning hey, we needed XYZ for the next month, and for whatever reason, we can't identify the ones that we need fast enough. And maybe we get to the party late and we have to overspend for a particular set of inventory. Our goal is to ensure that doesn't happen.
Where do you now you're a brand new company. Where do you see yourself 3 years from now, and what's in the pipeline, say, for 2020? We know you're with Black Book. That's going to be an amazing lift for you, but there's probably some other stuff that you have planned, and I'd love to know a little bit about what that might be.
I mean, I'll take that one first. I mean, right now we're just laser focused on producing the right recommendation for each customer that we have, and I know that's maybe sounds like a vanilla, boring answer. That really is our short-term focus, but that means that can mean a lot of things over time, and if we do that right, that gives us endless opportunity.
And there could be some other.
Kind of add to that too.
Go ahead. I'm sorry,
Kelly, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for us to maybe give you a sense, we have a long-term goal of making the entire wholesale market just more efficient generally. And we see a day where dealerships will log into Drivably. They'll set essentially a limit for the number of cars that they can hold over that next week or perhaps even the next month. And then autonomously, those cars just show up. And we believe that we can get to this point. It's going to take time. It's going to take some serious shifts in the general automotive market to happen. And it's going to require significant buy-in, but we believe that based on the accuracy of our recommendations, dealers will buy into that with time. And so, we're off to being 6 months out of the ground. We're off to an amazing start. We've got a number of, really exciting partnerships in the works right now. A couple of the biggest independent franchise groups in the U.S. we're working closely with. Obviously, can't really share too many details on that, but we feel that 2020 is going to be, we're very optimistic and opportunistic about the potential opportunities there. And, in short order, anybody and everybody who's a dealer that struggles with acquiring the right inventory will be able to sign up for a solution. It's going to be extremely competitive from a pricing standpoint, so much so that independents and franchise dealers alike across the U.S. will be able to afford it. And we see a vision of this becoming the one source of truth where people go to acquire wholesale inventory.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, gentlemen. That was none other than the founder and co-founder of Drivably, Tyler Hall and Andrew Sweet. Guys, thanks again. Hold the line as I bid everybody farewell. This is Kelly Kleiman, DealershipNews.com. That was the podcast for a hump day at the end of June. Talk to y'all soon. Stay tuned.